Good morning, everyone, and happy International Women's Day. Happy 2023 Women's History Month. And the symposium today, we're so excited that you're here, that we're here together. What an amazing speaker we heard earlier today. I was really pleased to be invited to share with you about innovative and inclusive leadership, what that looks like, how as leaders of the new age, if you will, we can continue to create a world that is inclusive of women, of people of various gender, racial, socioeconomic, cultural, national backgrounds, and so many other ways that we are diverse in our world. Just want to give you an idea of what you can expect today. I welcome you, first of all. It will be interactive. There will be at least one breakout, and we will have some questions that from time to time I'll be posing them to you. So hopefully as you both listen in and participate, you are ready as an empowered woman to move forward in this new world that requires a lot more of us in terms of innovation and inclusion. So I'm very happy to be here. I thought, well, like the speaker earlier, she looked up umbrella in the dictionary. So I did a search for innovative leadership. And I looked at articles, I looked at pictures, and this is one of the first things that came up. So I put here the current state of affairs. When I entered innovative leaders, innovative leadership, and I looked at some of the pictures that came up. So observations from folks in the room, the virtual room. You may know some of these people, but what's your observation just from this first slide here? What do you notice? All men. Help me with the chat. Yeah, they're all men, and it's shocking that on a women's history symposium, this is one of the first slides I'm showing, but I just want to share with you what the state of affairs is. First of all, innovation is often associated with technology, which it is. And some of you know that I lived in California for many years when I worked as an associate vice chancellor at the University of California, San Diego. And so, yeah, I'm familiar with biotech industries. We trained a lot of students and educated a lot of students who worked in Silicon Valley and did things like that. But innovation often associated with STEM or with technology. And as you said here, both in the chat and verbally, this is what is often the image of what innovative leadership looks like. So all men, and you'll notice also they're probably about the same age group. I'm going to say 40s, maybe 50s. Very, very, very rich. And most often, similar or one or two racial identities, often not including multiple other identities. So that's something that I noticed too. So I just wanted to share that with you, the current state of affairs. Part of the innovation, part of what we will talk about today that I encourage you to think about is, what is that world that we together want to create that is more realistic, that is more diverse, that's more inclusive, that is representative? These are actually other pictures of when I did things like women lead. I specifically found these pictures and said women leaders, and that's how I found these. It wasn't right away that innovative leaders produced our pictures. And shameless plug, I put my team members in here. So here, I'm here, my assistant vice chancellor, vice president, and my office, Wei-Ming Dariotes, acting program director, Rita Gatch on the left, and my assistant on the right. So, the EDI team, which I think is very diverse and having multiple varied identities in terms of culture, racial identity, socioeconomic backgrounds, education, all kinds of things that we've studied or learned. And all the other pictures that I saw online and some, as you said, people that I know here are representative of what we believe both in research and in practice makes for a better organization. Now, there's some things related to research that we know about organizations that are more inclusive and representative and more diverse. So I'm going to put some things out there generally, and I'll ask you to fill in some of those blanks. What's the benefit of having a group or organization that's representative of our current society, and particularly the region in which we live, in the Baltimore metro area and in the state of Maryland? What's the benefit of having an organization that is diverse and that's inclusive? Either verbally, or if you want to put it in the chat, I'm more than happy to share with you and listen to responses. We had to make a case for why it shouldn't look like this. and an organization that has some of these elements? Of course, the commonalities here, it's all women, but what are some ideas that you have? New ideas. Thank you, Ashley. Other benefits. People say, why does it matter? We'll just hire the most competent person. We really need people who do this kind of research or who can do this kind of job. I don't look at culture. I don't look at race. I don't look at, I just want to know what you can do. What are some of your responses to that? Sharing of thoughts and opinions, different ways of thinking about the same thing. Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much. All right. Well, some of what we also know is that, more ideas are coming in, diversity of thought, different experiences and backgrounds. We can relate more authentically. Great. And all the things that you're sharing from your experience, as well as what's in the research, is that organizations that are more inclusive, that are more diverse, have better and more effective problem solving. They are more productive. People are happier, are more engaged. There is more collaboration. There is increased teamwork. And I'll put this one in there because some people might say, well, it's not all about the money. Organizations that are more diverse and inclusive actually make more money, are more profitable. And although we're in higher education, we may say that does not matter. It matters because our money at the institution goes towards technology, it goes towards student education, financial aid, it goes towards paying those of us who are in these roles, it goes towards maintaining our facilities, it goes towards research, it goes towards finding cures for diseases, you name it. So if an organization is more profitable, we actually can move forward together with the new ideas, people feeling happy and included and being more productive. So let's talk a little bit more about what inclusive leadership is. So I like that in a graphic like this, there's some elements of the brain, the body, their lights, their people, their diagrams, they're all of those things. I would like to share with you, if you are not in any of these fields, as I said, it's typically associated with technology. I would like to share with you, when you think about your disciplines, your profession, your career, and where you are, that innovative leadership is about, I'll share with you 2 or 3 things, is about breaking barriers. Stop and think about that a minute as you think about your life, your career, your community, where you are located, right? That means questioning things that are the way they are. It means sometimes being the first in a role, in a position, the first to speak up about something, the first to respond to a particular article or policy or suggestion or something in a meeting. It may be the first to do something, or if you are not the individual first, you can in community ask critical questions and try to move things forward. Now, it may be that you'll say, well, I don't quite know how that happens. What does that look like? Well, I looked at where we are at University of Maryland, Baltimore, and where I've served before and work that I've done in the community. And one of the things that I know is that breaking barriers sometimes, not always, starts with leadership. Sometimes we'll say it starts at the top and everything else kind of trickles down in terms of culture. That's one way to think about our organizations, our groups, and our communities, that leadership matters and representation matters. I am proud to work at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, where I think when I look across the 5 or so institutions where I've worked over the last 30 years in higher education, from Howard University to George Mason, Trinity University, University of California, San Diego, and now here, this is one of the most diverse leadership teams that I have ever seen and or worked with in higher education. In fact, another plug, University of Maryland, Baltimore was recognized as one of Forbes' best places to work, one of the best employers, that's faculty and staff, for diversity. And one of the criteria for that award had to do with the diversity of the leadership. So all my fine colleagues that you see here are in all kinds of fields, from business to law to pharmacy to nursing, both deans and vice presidents. And we all, in one way or another, lead a particular unit. And again, we may say, well, this doesn't really, somebody might say it doesn't really matter. When you look at who is helping to lead, because we're not the only leaders, but we're focusing on women today, yay. When you look at who is leading our institution, what ideas do you have, both in terms of representation, their fields, who they are as people, and also their identities? Why do you think it matters that women are also, and diverse women are also in leadership roles? What are your thoughts about that? Why does it matter that you see all these women represented? And this is about more than half of our leadership. Can't see the chat anymore, Yama. Or you can just call it out if you like.
No comments just yet. If anyone wants to unmute themselves and just call out an answer, you're also welcome to do that. And Dan, maybe if you could just repeat the question for everyone.
I would say that it matters that women are leaders because they bring a different perspective. Women are natural nurturers,
Mm.
and they bring a different perspective to the table.
Thank you, Seifa. Women make up half of the world, so they should be represented. Give folks studying now a vision for where they can go. And Seifa says, it matters. We are nurturers, role models for younger generation. Absolutely. One of the things that we have heard in common lingo, but also in the research, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And that representation matters. And so by seeing either a woman or someone of a particular cultural, national, racial background or socioeconomic background, you go, oh, wow, I came from that kind of community too, or this person reminds me of. And so these are the ways in which people can aspire. Or children and grandchildren, Cynthia says, can see themselves in leadership positions. So that's really wonderful. And this, as you and I know, has not been the norm. If you think about what our mothers or grandmothers or great-grandmothers did in their lives, many of them did great things in their communities, in their careers, in their professions. But I know certainly for me, although I'm in the current role that I'm in, my mom was strong and is a leader, but most of her life she was a teacher, which is great, and surprise, I'm in education, but really in my family or in my life, I didn't see many women in leadership roles for a number of economic, academic, professional reasons, and so on. And so think about all the examples that are here that people can aspire to. Okay, so breaking barriers, doing things that have not been done in organizations or groups. And another major aspect of innovative and inclusive leadership is to think about new mindsets that can lead to new results. Sometimes when things don't quite work my way, our way, we might say, well, if the organization or if the community or if an individual person would do something, this would change things. I've been looking at all these various models about behavior modification, behavior change that involve questions that relate to myself or an individual. What can I do? What can I do to bring about a change in a given context? Now, we know many of the concerns that we face, and issues that we face, are systemic and are structural. However, there also is individual action and individual to individual action that can bring about group influence and group change. So there's a part of what we're talking around as it relates to breaking barriers that has to do with developing a new mindset. How can I challenge myself to think differently, to learn more, to explore new things about myself in order to bring about new results? And I guarantee you, if you and I are thinking in new and different ways about something, there's someone else who might be invited into that space, either to ask questions about what we're thinking or doing, or to also share, I've been thinking about the same thing. That's not working anymore. And I'd like to bring about a change, whatever that is in the department or in certain areas. Another component of innovative leadership relates to breaking barriers and new mindsets is challenging the status quo. What does that look like? So a few ideas that come from business leaders as well as psychological scholars are really a way to think about inclusion by bringing as many people in to share their ideas. Some of you have talked about that before in the chat. So inviting all perspectives. So at our institution, when we're thinking about particular changes, faculty, staff, students, postdocs, trainees, multiple ways for people to share what they're thinking. One of the ways that we can also challenge the status quo is to ask more questions. Questions that are around, that could be around, these are some ideas, where our strengths are, what we can build on, what opportunities do we have for change or for improvement, and how might we resolve things? So there's something about the question too that can include some direction, because sometimes people may hear a question and not know, well, what direction are we going in here? What would you like to know? And so questions could be around, how do we resolve this? What do you observe, and what the opportunities and challenges are? The other thing about leadership is be ready to facilitate that change. Now, sometimes when you're in that meeting or you're in a particular convening and you say, you know what we should do? And you say that thing and they go, Dan, you should take that on. And you're like, did I bring that up? Because you don't want to, you're like, I didn't bring it up to do anything. But this is what leaders do. Leaders influence, they inspire, they motivate. And what I do believe in is not individual action. I do believe in collective action. And often, even though people may not say something to you right there in that moment, I will share this too. Tell me if you've had this kind of experience. You're in a meeting, you're in some kind of gathering, and something comes up and you're the only one who says that. Then after the meeting, people go, thank you so much for saying that, because I was thinking this, and I was like, why didn't you say anything? But that is actually a dynamic of groups where sometimes we either we lack the courage, the skill, the ability. We believe that the person has done that really well, so we don't really need to add anything onto that. But what it does mean is if we do raise the concern or question, to be ready to facilitate the change, and I would say, and seek support and help and collaboration to advance what those things are. So as you think about what innovative and inclusive leadership looks like, I didn't want to mention things and assume that everyone has the same idea or believes the same thing when we talk about diverse leadership or diversity. So I did want to take a moment to step back a little bit to look at what diversity is. And for the most part, it's about those ways that our social identities are represented. And so diversity is often about representation, which is like some of the pictures I showed you earlier of our women leaders here at University of Maryland, Baltimore. Diversity can refer to all of these things and much more, such as gender identity and expression, age, race, more. I'm seeing things related to political beliefs, socioeconomic background. I've shared that before, occupation, family and relationship status. As you look at these things, especially since COVID, what aspects of identity, either for you or for others, are we paying more attention to? Since COVID, since the reckoning that we had in 2020, what areas, at least for you, are standing out in society as areas that we are either talking more about, debating more around, or that's more resonant? Look at all those aspects of our identity. What areas stand out most since 2020? Winnie, is Alexander?
Yes. For me, it's about walking in my authenticity. Because with COVID, it just felt like, the world shut down, and that was for the first time. And, is it the end of the world? Are we, what's happening? And I think that at this moment in time, for me, it shook me. And it was like, you know what? I need to be authentic in who I am, irregardless of what other people think I should be.
Okay, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
So that might be related to personality, who you are. One could say it's related to your being a woman, like, here I am. I'm going to be entirely and authentically when he says who she is. Other things that either for you or that you're noticing in society in terms of social identity, that has stood out for you or that you're noticing.
I'll say, I think particularly with the transition to a lot of remote work, family status has become very prominent. This
Yep.
acknowledgement that people are more than just the workers at work.
Yes.
They are parents, they are, children, caregivers, and that kind of needs to be accepted. The whole worker, the whole being needs to be accepted and acknowledged if you want to be able to continue having these people in your organization.
Wonderful, amazing. Thank you. And Seifa said a similar thing in the chat, family and relationship status. I remember years ago, and I don't know people's age on this call, having, my children are older now, but having a 2-year-old with a nosebleed at like 2 a.m., and I had a meeting. I was a department chair at the time. I had a meeting, and I remember sending an email like as soon as I realized I'm not going to make that all hands on deck college-wide meeting for all the administrators and faculty. And I sent the email. I didn't get a response back, which is normal. It's early in the morning and all this. I was like, oh my God, I felt so nervous about being late. In fact, I felt nervous that I might actually miss the thing. And I remember like rushing to the appointment, rushing through the appointment, trying to get somewhere to put my kid, the whole thing, because you can't just like, I couldn't take her to daycare or anything. So I called her grandmother, who was alive still and living in Northwest DC, and I had to drive from Maryland to DC. And I was trying to, I got to the meeting, got there late, and said, to my superior, if you got my email, oh my God, my daughter had this nosebleed. And I was going on, I was so disheveled. And he was like, oh yeah, your kid was sick. And it was just like, yeah, kind of thing. And he just kind of looked at his watch like, okay, let's get to it. And I remember thinking, it doesn't even matter that my whole world was turned upside. Like I was in tears, woken up at 2, tried to get her in. Thank goodness it wasn't an emergency. These things happened to children. She was 2. And the message that I received was, handle your stuff. That wasn't the word I was thinking actually, but handle it and get in here and do my work. That's the message that I received. Now, he may not have intended any of that at all, but I remember thinking, nobody cares. Nobody cares about your family and your relationship issues. Just get in here. My spouse had a big corporate job and he did what he could to try to get everything together like a meal and pack us a bag, all that good stuff. But I remember thinking, oh boy, don't bring this up again. Just like say, I'll be out today or whatever it is and keep it moving. Now, since COVID, based on all the things that you're all sharing here, I think that is different now. Someone says family, occupational status. Okay, so moving on. Oh, we went back somehow. Okay, so in terms of equity, this is one of the definitions that I'll share. So as you're thinking about your own leadership, okay, so we say we have a diverse workforce and you look at all those elements that are there. Equity is now thinking about fairness and justice across all of those groups and within those groups, across those groups, even within an age, looking at age, across those generational groups, looking at race, culture, gender identity, and expression, across those groups, are those groups receiving the supports, are the barriers being removed, are the disparities being removed for groups that are experiencing disparities or differences in their experiences or the resources that they receive? So here, how I've done this based on research from Ben Simon and other scholars is that, and based on the collective impact framework by Kania and others out of Stanford, is equity is fairness and justice achieved through systematically looking at or assessing disparities in outcomes, opportunities, representation, and then ensuring that we redress those disparities through targeted actions. So people will ask, well, isn't that showing favoritism? Everybody should just get the same size shoes or the same $20 across or the same $1 million across. However, if the starting point for one individual is different from another, or if the resources an individual had was less than 0 or at 0, and others started with other resources at 20, 50, 2-3 degrees ahead, or starting doing some tech related things at age 8 or 9, and then you get to college and you're now beginning, because of the communities, the schools, the systems in which you were educated, there needs to be some equitable action to redress some of those things. I'll give you an example. So the advantage that some of us have is our occupation. We are employed. That's not the case for about 30% of parts of our population, and some cultural, racial, ethnic groups have even a higher rate of unemployment. There is some economic, academic, professional privilege for some of us. Given my role and my position and having worked in universities for many years, I remember looking at my son's ability and seeing that he was really interested in technology, like his dad. And I thought, oh, this is great. We're in California. We're at a university where there are programs offered for pre-K and K. Think about this, pre-K, K through 6, for coding, for robotics, I know, right? Wow. And not my world at all. I'm into organizational communication, social psychology. And I was like, okay, the eager education person that I am, and studying some of these things, I thought, he's interested. His dad, individual who went to College Park here and studied engineering, was exposing him to some of these things. And I thought, oh, I saw this program. It's an institute called ID Tech. If you just do a search for ID Tech, if your kids are interested in things like that, they have virtual and in-person programs. More virtual now, but since COVID. But anyway, it was being held on my campus at University of California, San Diego. And I remember going, oh, I think my son would be interested in this. Let me see. So I went home, showed it to him. He was like, oh, sounds good. So it was one of those summer camp things. In these camps, you're talking about 8, 9, 10 years old. In these camps, it would be an entire week, like a work day or a school day, from like 9 a.m. to 4 or 5 p.m., which is when we would be at work. I'd drop him off right there on the campus, which is awesome. Drop him off, and then I'd go over to my building, which is like half a mile away, drive over and say, okay, really, essentially, if you need me, call me, but everything was fine with the camp counselors. And then at the end of the week, you would graduate, and there are different kinds of classes. He was in that program almost every summer for about 3 years. 8, 9, 10 years old, and then 11, they did an online thing. It wasn't as interesting, but it was COVID, what we were going to do. And I remember going there looking at the representation of the students who were there. He was one of the few students of color. And in some of his classes, he was the only African-American male. Again, it's California, but also I'm showing you at 8, 9, 10, who has access to those resources and technology. Computer science professors and computer science students from the University of California system, from Santa Cruz, LA, and some other places, were teaching these 8, 9, and 10-year-olds. I was thinking, wow, he's the only one who looks like him in a particular cultural, racial, ethnic group. When I looked at it, I thought, my husband and I thought of it and said, well, if we look at it, the cost of it is prohibitive for some people. I had an advantage because I was within the university, so I had a discount of sorts. And even if we could, if we were asked to pay the full cost, we would. And the other thing is, there wasn't anything that said, for a particular group or a partner school or community school, that there would be something there. I'm sharing with you now that put that same kid, my kid and his other friends who were in that thing, in that group. Now he's going to be 18 next year. So 10 years hence, he is in these AP and honors courses for Java, for coding, for computer science, and all of these things, acing it, completely acing it. Yes, it's my son, and woo! And we're educators, and my spouse is in STEM. Think about that student who never had access to that at 8 and who's going to go to college, and for the first time, and of course, any student can excel with the supports and with the resources, right? I thought about it, I said, there is a way in which is part of why I'm in this work, that the students who then get to college and are in that experience with him are going to be at a disadvantage, who did not have the 8, 9, 10-year-old and have the dad at home building circuits with him. And this is actually where it begins, right? In pre-K and K, where students have the access to that. So if we were to think about students now, and I was at Howard University for 5 years, as some of you know, and I remember Howard University, I think they might still have a partnership with Google. And I was listening to a program on this, and it was quite similar, that Google is developing this partnership with Howard because a number of the Howard students, depending on their background and where they'd gone to school, were not, quote, Silicon Valley ready, which is where some of them wanted to work. And so the Google entrepreneurs and tech folks were saying, well, the same things that students 10 years before were getting, they wanted to make sure they shored up the skills and provided access and the resources for those students to have that. Although it would be at 18, 19 years old, from my perspective, it is an equitable response and important. Inclusion is some of what we were talking about earlier when we looked at the pictures online, is, making sure we welcome, engage people that are collaboratively working, and that people feel like full engaged participants in an initiative, in an organization. And if they don't feel that, then belonging becomes an issue. I tried to open the chat and I think my slides went back and forth. Oh, Linda says, my son attended the same camp for a few summers and we experienced, the same lack of diversity. We don't see people who look like us in an area in the world of work that influences our interests and that area in our self-confidence and our ability to excel in that area. Absolutely. Race, ethnicity. Okay. Thank you so much for those comments, Ashley and others. Great. Okay, so we are going to now break out for a while to look at some of these ideas and to share your thoughts on, so breaking barriers, challenging the status quo, thinking about new mindsets. These are all aspects of innovative and inclusive leadership. And I gave you some examples and also provided for you ways in which in technology, we could say some of the same things in medicine. I could tell a medicine story, but I want you to have the time to talk with each other, and then we'll come back together. So about 10 minutes, you'll explore this question. The 3 areas that I'm proposing, breaking barriers, developing new mindsets, and challenging the status quo, are aspects. It's not all of it. We can't talk about all of it today, but are aspects of innovative and inclusive leadership as women. What areas would you like to develop further as an innovative leader? And if you have a strength and you'd like to talk about that in your breakout, 10 minutes together, it'll be 3 of you. So hopefully everyone will have at least 3 or so minutes. What areas would you like to develop further? If you already have a strength in breaking barriers or developing a new mindset or challenging the status quo, share that as well. You can inspire another woman on the call. That would be really great. So for 10 minutes, and Fiamma will put that in the chat. You can take a screenshot of this. You can look in the chat for those questions. Across those 3 areas, when you think about inclusion and innovation, what areas would you like to develop further? Okay, so it's in the chat right now, and the breakout rooms are there. You have about 10 minutes.
If anyone has trouble getting into a breakout room, please let me know, but you should be able to join it now.
Great. See ya.
Yes.
It's free to have a group. Oh, some groups have 2.
Yes, there should have been 3 there unless somebody
And
left.
one group has 4.
I'm going to move the person with 2 people into another room. So let me rearrange.
I don't even know how to do that. Okay.
I just put in one person into room 6.
Okay.
And Frida, I will move to room 7. I don't know how that happened. It should have been 3 rooms for all of them except for one that had 4. But that's okay. We're now all at 3 as intended, and one has 4.
Okay, so I'll hang out here, and then another minute I'll jump in and see what they're up to.
And I broadcasted the questions to them. Hopefully that helps.
I'm going to jump in one. Let's see. Or did I lose? Share screen, this and that. I should see this other people on this. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Would love to take a few minutes. Welcome back. Hello. Hello. Welcome back.
Have 30 seconds till the room fully closes.
Okay, some more people coming in. That's great. Hopefully it was a great discussion.
All right, everyone should be joining in 1 second. There we go.
Coming back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Smiling faces. So that was great to interact with your colleagues across campus, huh? That's awesome. So we'd love to take a few minutes to hear what you all talked about, what you learned, what you shared. We may not be able to get to every group because I think there are about 7 or so groups, but anyone who would like to share with the larger group what you learned, what you discussed, who wants to go? Seifa?
I'll share.
Mhm.
We had a very interesting conversation, and we ran out of time. We still had so much more to talk about. But we kind of hit on uh, challenging the status quo. And, not everybody's comfortable in stepping out of their zone to do that. And most of our conversation was on also breaking barriers because those barriers, and not only does it help the person that's the first of doing this as the first, it more so helps benefits more of other people who doesn't seem like we had the first president, a black president, right? And the teachers always told you, you can be anything you want to be. But how many people in our young world even thought, oh, I want to be president of the United States? They didn't think it was possible, because
Mm.
they've never seen it, this, that, and other. So now, although former President Obama was the first, now other people are inspired and they believe that they can achieve that
Mhm. Mhm.
goal or position.
Mhm.
So not only does meeting barriers uh, work for the person doing it, it's better, it benefits others like you. So
It's
that was
great.
the
Thank you.
gist of our conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure there was a lot more rich stuff going on, and I'm sorry about the time. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. And another group, would love to hear any reflection, what you heard, what you learned, shared. Please.
Yes. Let me change my camera here. Yeah, so we talked about the mindset and the status quo, challenging the status quo. And we had talked about some people may not want to challenge the status quo, they may want to question.
Hmm.
Some things don't need to be challenged, it may just need to be questioned. And looking at that, and when we said the status quo, we started talking about the box, the mindset and how to get out of that. And that it's hard to change the mindset, and that's something to look forward to. And
Mhm.
we talked about thinking outside the box, but we also looked at removing the box, because the box ties us to what's in the box, the box.
Mm.
But if we remove the box, then there's nothing for us to tie it to, and we can have a more open perspective.
Mhm. Thank you for that. That's awesome. Because a box is a container. It's restrictive in a
Yes.
sense, whatever that is. Now, I'm not saying
Yes.
we shouldn't have rules and laws because we absolutely need those things. You got to pay taxes on time and so forth, right? Or you need to have a certain speed limit, or when the red light says red, there's a reason for some of those things.
Right.
We know what you mean. Let's dream. Let's think about what we don't
Yes.
yet have as the example that Safer gave.
Yes.
Great, great. One other comment, and then we can continue on. Other discussions, insights. This is great. Okay, well, I'll keep going then. All right. So let's then talk about, so you talk now about what else needs to be developed and where you are already strong that you shared. I'd like to share a few things related to leadership competencies. So it's one thing to have these great ideas and to dream and to move forward. It's another thing to then be in the role, and it doesn't mean leader as in title with lots of degrees. It means someone who has the influence, who can motivate, inspire people. Well, what does that take? So here's some ideas. It's not at all complete, but here's some ideas for what effective leaders need as you challenge the status quo, break barriers, and you actually deliver on promises that you've made, or help people to be inspired by what you're proposing. Communication is really important. Clear messages, concise messages, organized messages, and also so oral and written, and also being able to listen and to share and collaborate with others. Like, these are important skills. Self-management and development. If we had more time, we could take a whole half an hour, a whole hour to talk about women and self-care. Can we talk about that? We talked about the whole person earlier, right? So mind, body, spirit. And people sometimes ask me, well, how do you accomplish these things? Or how do you get all these things done in a day? How do you perform these roles, whether home, work, wherever, community, or with my family and so forth? And I'm sorry, some days I wonder, but I do have a very disciplined physical practice, and I do have a fairly disciplined spiritual practice as well. And so I'm thinking, I need to exercise, I need to walk, I need to hike, I need to do those kinds of things to just kind of get my head right, but also to appreciate nature. And that's really important to me, as well as spiritually being mindful and reading inspirational readings, things like that. And it looks different for different people, prayer, etc. And so these are some recommendations for competencies that we can develop over time: coaching, mentorship, sponsorship, and so on. Another model that I'd like to share with you, we won't be able to go through everything necessarily, this will be recorded, are other competencies related to, I think, some of the work here at UMB. And for me, I would start with people-centered. Like anything we do with leadership, if we think about innovation and inclusion, from my perspective, without the people, I don't know where we're going. So we could have all the technology, we could have all the money, but we need to work with people. We need to listen to people. We need to like people, love people even, and be ready to share ideas. And just like we did in the breakout, what were the ideas you shared there that could inspire or change what I'm doing, and vice versa. Being strategic and integrative, part of the strategy is, does my leadership team, does my community, does the group with which I'm working represent the various diverse identities, both in terms of social identity, professional, academic background, experience? Is it diverse as we think about that, but also being strategic as in organizing and setting a particular direction and then a plan for how we are going to get there. So the dreaming is great, but at some point we will have to think about what our steps are that we're putting in place to do that. I could certainly go through the others. Values driven, we have our core values at UMB. We talk about them quite a bit: respect and integrity, equity and justice, and so on. And one of the proposed ones here is culturally competent. In social work and other disciplines, more and more, we've been talking about cultural humility, because no one ever accomplishes, well, I know this about this culture and now I'm competent, check mark, because sometimes we can tend to do that. Even in a role like the one I have, I'm continuing to learn about identities. I'm continuing to learn about experiences, about research, about opportunities, and ways that I can learn and grow. And so if you think about all of these, in addition to all the things we've been discussing, these are some of the ways that we can increase our competence. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but more and more in the literature, both in terms of organizational leadership, innovation, when we're talking about health, mental health and well-being, and being more effective leaders, emotional intelligence is emerging, or has emerged over the last 10 or so years, and I would say even more since 2020, as a very key important aspect of identity development, as well as leadership development. And what emotional intelligence is, in brief, is being able to both self-manage and navigate complex social environments. And so both managing self and environment. And I know that's hard to do because we can't really manage people or context, but it is, what are the best decisions we're making in a complex environment to achieve the best outcomes? And how does that happen? It happens by, and I'm starting on the left, stress management. Thinking about and understanding how we perceive ourselves, how we express ourselves, our interpersonal relations, our decision making, and you'll see all the elements that are related to that. On the outer part of this, what is something that you'll see repeated is well-being, performance, and emotional and social functioning. So many aspects here around emotional intelligence, and there's actually a measure for EQ, emotional quotient. Previously, it was a lot of emphasis on IQ, how intelligent someone is. But there's more now on how we understand and work with others, how we resolve conflict, how we relate and communicate to others based on their backgrounds and based on what we know. And also, do we know our strengths and weaknesses? Like, do we know ourselves? So self-knowledge, self-management, you see here emotional self-awareness are key aspects of emotional intelligence. So when we think about those aspects, there's so much more I could say there. I'm going to close with a story, and there's some other elements that we could talk about, but I'm going to close with a story about how we can make a positive impact and why these things actually matter. Dr. Mae Jamison talks about how she got into STEM, how she got into being a trailblazer and being an astronaut in science and those kinds of things. And she said, in order for her to have ascended to where she was, as going to space and studying aspects related to that, as an African-American woman in the United States, she said what was important was exposure experience, and expectations. Exposure, experience, and expectations. As innovative and inclusive leaders, wherever one, you can gain these things or you can give these things, it would be really important. So you think about growing as a leader, wherever you can gain greater exposure, gain greater experience, think about expectations and what you either expect of yourself or what others expect of you, either challenge those or develop those. And if you are developing young people or people junior to you in your various roles, to provide these kinds of things. I don't know if I can get into both stories here, Fiamma, but I'll do the career day story first and then open it up for any questions to close at 10:45. Maybe the next session I'll have time for 2 stories, but I'll share part of my story. If you take your phones or if you're online right now and do a search for CEO, for example, a Google search for CEO and look for images, you might see something like what I saw in the current state of affairs when I put innovative leaders. You might. I don't know what you would have seen. If you do another search quickly and you do a search for pilot, P-I-L-O-T, pilot, and you take a look at who's there. And I could, come up with more things like US presidents, for example, and you'll see certain representations of who's there. When I was in high school, and this actually has shaped my identity quite a bit, I went to an all-girls school. I may have shared this with some of you before, and I went to this all-girls school for 7 years of my adolescent life, which is a long time in a teenager's life, or preteen to teen, right? Supposed to say, oh, I've been in a relationship for so long. You're like, really, how long? And they're 14, they're like, 5 months. And you're like, oh, that's so cute. That's so cute. So the time in a young person's mind is a little bit different. So I went for 7 years, even in an adult's life, 7 years is quite a time. So we had a career day, and I was going to, when I did all the tests, there were 3 things that came up for me: education, counseling, and law. So I did the test, and I kind of have aspects of my work over the last at least 15, 20 years that have some aspects to do with that. So I was going to those workshops that had to do with law, education, or something with counseling or psychology or something like that. So on the way there, I'm walking, and I see 2 women, and sometimes they were the parents of students or community people. And I saw 2 women at the front of a class in all white with a hat. And I was like, oh, military. And I'd seen women in the military before, but something about them seemed a little different based on the stripes on the hat and on their lapel and things. And I was like, so I stopped and I said, what's that? And they were like, oh, that's so-and-so's mom or so-and-so, whatever community. So they named the person by who they were related to, but didn't tell me the profession. What I was really asking is, what do they do? Because I knew what a lawyer or a judge might look like. That's okay, the law one. The education one, I could say, okay, I know I'm going to that room. And counseling, well, professional woman, perhaps. And in the girls' school, they really did try to get more women to be the career leaders for the sessions. So I couldn't shake it. And I went back and I said, yeah, but what do they do? And they said, oh, they're pilots, just like other pilots. This was 1980 something. I was like, I'd flown on a plane, not a lot, but I had never seen in movies, in pictures or anything like that. I had never seen a woman pilot. And so, although I didn't choose that for my career, I always knew from the time I was a young person that even though I didn't choose it, I could be it. And that exposure to that, maybe that has something to do with my son getting into tech and his dad. Like, what do I know? But I do remember thinking I knew women could be educators in counseling and they could be in law because I had seen them at that career day. That exposure and the experience that I had, and then those who went to them said, what did they say? I couldn't wait to hear what it was about. So I certainly had that time. And so think about what role models you could be for someone and or the exposure that you might want to gain in order to be more innovative and inclusive. We're almost at time. Thank you, everyone. I'll use our final minute for any comments or questions if you have any. And if not, Fiamma is going to close out for us. Thank you.
So, hi everyone. My name is Fiamma Romero, and I am the volunteer facilitator for this breakout room. Thank you all so much for joining us for today's program. Just a few items before our speaker gets started. First, this breakout session is being recorded and will be posted on the Umbrella webpage in the coming weeks. Please make sure that your microphone is muted, but feel free to unmute if Dr. Forbes-Berthoud asks the group a question. And during this session, feel free to add any comments or questions in the chat, and we'll try to answer as many of the questions as we can towards the end of the session during our Q&A. And now I'll turn things over to our speaker, Dr. Diane Forbes-Berthoud, to present Innovative and Inclusive Leadership, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, Leadership and Integration.
Thank you so much, Fiamma, and thank you everyone for joining this morning, still morning. What an amazing day we've had so far. Happy International Women's Day and happy 2023 Women's History Symposium, sponsored by Umbrella at University of Maryland, Baltimore. Isn't it a great time to be a woman? Woo! I can't see all the faces, but I'm sure you're cheering along with me. So as I thought about, what we would talk about today and did some research online and have some ideas about where we are, I want to welcome you. And we are going to talk today about inclusive and innovative leadership. Innovative leadership is part of the theme for today's program. What a great keynote we had and a great discussion. We were offering the same breakouts twice. And so we had a great group earlier and thought I would look up what are innovative leaders? So I looked up innovative leaders, innovative leadership, and I saw many images, and this is one of those images. Interesting. Women's History Symposium, this is one of the first slides that I might share. What's your observation here of America's most innovative leaders? What do you notice? And we're in a women's program. Let's just make a note of that. You can either put it in the chat or you can unmute on what you see in both business and technology. So Kelly says men, all men, white men, male, all men. So I start here because this is the current state of affairs. Typically, if we do searches either in business, particularly in tech and in higher education, we will see that most of the leadership is men. And probably of a certain age as well, for all kinds of social, socio-academic, communication reasons, all kinds of reasons, right? But when I think about what we'll talk about today, to me, I'd like the world to look more like this. More women represented in leadership and innovative leaders. And shameless plug, I put the members of my team in the slide here with Ms. Rita Gatch and Dr. Wiming Dariotis and Ms. Katie Hughes on my team, and then lots of images across. And I found some of these pictures when I entered women leaders. When I entered innovative leaders or leadership, I saw different kinds of images and figures, but not necessarily diverse pictures that included as many women as I'm putting here for us as representation. What is innovative leadership? What are the ways in which we can think about doing some of the things that we see here that involve either the brain or people or figures? Bottom left, we see the world. Somehow we have to be thinking holistically about what are the kinds of things we want to change in our world, and people who are in leadership roles need to then be thinking about how can I impact that world with new thinking and new ways of doing things. So let's bring it home. Part of innovative leadership, and I'll talk about how some of that happens at the university here and also in our world, part of innovative leadership is breaking barriers. It involves thinking about things differently, doing things that others have not done or have not been doing. Sometimes it means being the first in a community, the first in a family, the first in a clinic, the first in an office, the first in a meeting to ask a particular question or to make a recommendation. Innovation isn't just about being first, it's also about bringing about positive change. And sometimes we see things we have not seen before. So bringing it home here, these are our women leaders who I'm happy to hail and happy to collaborate with as colleagues. And I put here that this is part of breaking barriers. As some of you know, over about 30 years in higher education, this is the most women leaders that I have seen and most culturally and racially diverse group that I have seen across the 5 or so institutions where I've worked over 30 years. Interestingly, this is seen as unusual and so noteworthy that we were designated one of the best employers by Forbes magazine best employers for diversity, not just in higher education, but for diversity across the US, across 500 institutions. And we were number 6 out of 40 higher education institutions. Someone will say, well, why does this matter? We just hire the best person, a leader, any leader can do any kind of job. I'm highlighting this. This is taken from an ad that my office published, as well as the Office of External Affairs published. And we use some of these graphics to demonstrate our importance or the relevance to us, and also the priority that we place on women and women as leaders. So question to you, open your mic, please, or you can drop something in the chat. Why does this matter that we have these many women leaders on our campus and this kind of representation? Do you even think this is important? What are your thoughts on that? Why is it important to have a representative, diverse leadership group? So we have a comment in the chat. Charisse, hope for the younger generation of women. Tara says representation matters. It's great. Other thoughts, whether verbally or in the chat? We belong. I love that. Thank you, Megan. We'll bring in more strong women leaders, Tara continues to say. Great. Other thoughts? Okay. So one of the terms that I would share here also to add to all the great ideas shared so far is, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And so in that sense, to support what my colleague said earlier, and Kelly says here, diversity in thinking, it is this idea that representation matters in terms of dreaming, in terms of identification, and saying, oh, maybe someday I could do something like that, whether this or being a leader in another context. Another part of innovative and inclusive leadership is developing new mindsets. And here it is this idea that we change how we think about something, we can influence outcomes and have new and different results. You may have seen in different contexts, that the kinds of circles where it says things I can't control and things I can control. And the things we can't control are sometimes external to ourselves, whether other people, things, dynamics, and the things that I can control, and that we think about those kinds of things. So innovative leadership is also about a new mindset, a new and different way to think about something. You may have heard, and if I have time later, I'll touch on it a little bit more. Professor Dweck, formerly of Stanford, has written about growth mindset and fixed mindset. Well, a new mindset is part of the growth mindset, that I can always learn new skills, and that if it is, I can't do math or I don't speak this language, part of what she encourages us to do is say yet, and how that yet changes so many things by saying, I can't speak Spanish or I can't write yet. In other words, we're always learning and growing, and that can bring about a new result. Another aspect of innovative and inclusive leadership is challenging the status quo. What does that look like? Is it only saying, well, that's not working, I don't want to do that? Or is it also about what I share with you here, which is inviting all perspectives, hearing from as many people as we can, whether, as we're doing in this conversation, whether by text, you're going to break out soon, or you'll share an idea verbally, asking more questions. And when we talk about the anatomy of a question, some of the ideas for innovative leaders is that our questions can lead to pointing out opportunities and challenges, strengths, what we do really well, or individually or organizationally, as well as questions that may lead us to speaking about and addressing how we might resolve an issue or concern. Now, the third part of this challenge of the status quo is interesting, because innovative leaders then need to be ready and willing to facilitate that change. When you're in that meeting, or when you're on that committee, and you might say, have we ever thought painting the wall red? Or have we ever thought of introducing this policy? Or have we ever thought of reading this book and having a book club? And all of a sudden somebody says, great idea, Diane, would you like to do that? And you kind of go, that's not what I wasn't and I was just raising an idea, raising a question, and here it goes. Now I have that thing to do. I understand that that can be a challenge. Along with that, however, here's what I've noticed from time to time. And when I taught, in more of my regular life, sometimes one student might say one thing, or on a committee, one person might say something. And have you seen, so Fiamma raises a question or says something at the end of that meeting, they go after and they go, thank you so much for saying that. I was thinking the same thing. And then Fiamma goes, well, why didn't you just say that? Or why didn't you, And so sometimes there's a challenge when we do share where we're coming from, and we might be the only one in the room saying that thing. This is part of courageous leadership, being ready to facilitate the change and to back someone up, to provide some allyship for that individual, whether in that context or in another context, to actually help them to do that work and not be so-called punished for raising that new idea. So as we talk about innovative leadership, and I don't want to necessarily use EDI and equity, diversity, and inclusion with the assumption that we're all thinking and talking about the same thing. So I'll spend some time shaping that, and then I'll get us ready for our first breakout. And so when we talk about diversity as innovative leaders, these are things we have to be thinking about, right? So when we talk about representation matters, representation of what? So here are all the identities that we can hold, and then more, right? Related to age, gender identity and expression, ethnicity, race, religion, political beliefs, disability, immigration status, family and relationship status. Let's pause for a moment, look at the list, and especially since 2020, which identities have you noticed in our society or even in your own life that have become more salient or have stood out to you as more important, or you're noticing them more, especially since 2020 or in your own life? Feel free to open your mic or put something in the chat. These are all the ways in which we're alike and all the ways that we're different. Which identities stand out for you, or since 2020, you're finding people are talking about it more in our society? You open your mic or feel free to put something in the chat. Okay, so a few things are coming in. Gender identity, thank you, Katie. Others? Care and responsibilities, child and elder care. Thank you, Jennifer. Racial identity, says Kelly. Great. And we could certainly add more dependency responsibilities. Absolutely. And so it could be even before 2020, we might have been thinking about 2 or 3 of these, maybe gender and culture, maybe race or religion. However, since 2020 or more recently, different persons are putting in the chat, different things are coming up for folks. Kelly, great point. Family matters used to be private as we work towards more balance and work-life harmony. Thank you for that. And when I met with the group earlier, a story, I know that this has been raised more than once, a story that came to mind was about 20 years ago now. I had, almost 20 years ago, I had a 2-year-old. Can't believe she was 2, now she's almost 5'10". Oh my God, when does that happen? Anyway, my daughter Maya, that some of you have heard me talk about, she was about 2 and she had some serious health concerns from about 0 to 7, 0 to 8 that had to do with some respiratory concerns, among some other things. Anyway, in the middle of the night at about 2 a.m., because she was, I don't know if anybody knows anything about asthma and things like that, but anyway, she used to have this nebulizer that she would use. And what the doctor told me is that it made your capillaries or whatever it's called, like really sensitive on the inside of your nose, your nostrils. And one night, 2 a.m., and they usually come to my side of the bed because the mom is the one that gets up, at least in my house. And she came to my side of the bed and I just opened my eyes in a fog and the whole of the right side of her face was full with blood. And what it was is that she had a nosebleed and, she slept on the side of whatever side. And so the whole half, and and I literally wake up, you see your 2-year-old at this. I'm just like flying out of the bed going, oh my God. So we clean her up, by this point I had to wake my husband up and everything, clean her up, get her ready. And I'm like, I think she needs to see the doctor because I didn't exactly know what was happening. One of the first things, I kid you not, that was in my mind was we have an all hands on deck faculty meeting. I was department chair and I was going, oh my God, I cannot miss this meeting. But on the other hand, I had this 2-year-old who was very sick. I remember getting to urgent care, trying to deal with it quickly because I was like, the daycare is not going to take her if she's like this. And I have to get to work, And I remember taking her to her grandmother's house, my husband's mom, in Northwest DC. I was working at Trinity University at the time. Dashed down there. I sent an email earlier in the morning, like 4 or 5 when, I kind of got online and sent my email. And so worried about being late for this meeting. And I remember saying to my colleague, to whom I reported that, I'm so sorry, did you get my email? Maya was sick, she had a nosebleed. I don't even remember getting through the story. I remember he said to me, oh yeah, your kid's sick. He just went on to the agenda for the meeting. I remember thinking, I'm like crying about this kid. I'm worried she's not going to make it through the night, And I got the impression that I should just handle my business and whatever family concerns or issues that I had. It's not something I should talk about at work, and I should just do the university's business and keep moving. Now, he may not have intended that at all, but I certainly was thinking being a mom and being an administrator can really be very hard with a 2-year-old, More so now, I think, and I hope you agree with me, if so, thumbs up. I think the workplace, and certainly our universities, and definitely at University of Maryland, Baltimore, we are more compassionate and we're more understanding of these kinds of questions and issues. And we are thinking now, elder care, child care, it's not a crime to be a parent or to be caring for elders. It's actually a joy and an honor that we have that opportunity to do that. So diversity can be about child care and elder care issues, family status, gender, and all these other related issues. And as innovative, inclusive leaders, we're also thinking about equity, the opportunities, the differences and barriers across groups and individuals and social identities, and that there needs to be fairness. And when we systematically examine those disparities and barriers, that we work actively to redress those with targeted measures to bring about a change. So one of the examples that comes to mind is in tech, for example. And some of you know, I lived in California for 11 years. I talked about my daughter and I talked about my son. And now I have a son who's really interested in tech things. 1, he was in that environment. 2, his dad is in that world. And 3, whether his mind is just made that way, he's really talented. He was 7, 8, 9. He was building circuits with his dad, and he was beginning to learn coding. He built a computer by the time he was 10, and he took it down and put it back up. And It's a whole world that I don't understand fully, but I know he's really talented. We had a program at the university called ID Tech. And in the previous session, someone said they had put their child in that program as well. And this is a program where computer science professors and computer science students taught these K and pre-K students about coding, Java, all the computer stuff, which my son loved. When I got there, I realized that, first of all, it was mostly boys in the program. Secondly, there were few children of color. And thirdly, there were almost no African Americans in that program. In fact, in one of his classes, he was the only African American student, boy or girl. I thought, interesting. It is also California, but at the same time, I thought, it's on a university campus, the cost of the program, and people who put their children in those programs were either educators or they themselves were engineers, computer science, and so on. And when you look at the population of those groups, they're mostly, at least in California, Asian, of white identity, or men. And these are the people who are dropping their kids off. We happen to have either tech in our family or worked at the university campus. What I learned over the years, both in terms of personal experience, but also looking at the research and looking at the data over time in terms of disparities, is that trend continues on beyond my son's age. He's going to be 18 next year. Beyond my son's age, when we look at dynamics in the United States, that it's mostly a male-dominated field, very few women in some of those tech fields, and very few people of color and non-Asian people of color who are involved, whether Latinx, Indigenous, or African-American or Black students. Those kinds of disparities can be addressed at the university level and are addressed at the university level. But I'll share with you that I learned, and some of you know also I had a 5-year appointment at Howard University and still have colleagues there. And what I learned is that Google now has a partnership with Howard University where they open resources, supports, mentorship relationships for students to be either Google mentored at Google or to be employees there or interns there, which is really great. But one of the things in listening to the programs that I've heard recently is they would then go to Google and not necessarily have the Harvard students from time to time may not have the same skill level or knowledge or background as some of the other students who would have been in programs like ID Tech in California or other places. And so I thought, interesting. My son's now in these classes in high school, Java, AP this, and he is completely acing them because he started doing this at 8. And now at 17, going to be 18, it's so easy for him because has had 10 years practice, whereas some of these other students who had gone to schools that didn't provide those resources or communities where those centers weren't set up. So that would be a disparity. And so I appreciate that universities build those programs in with communities or professional organizations to close some of those gaps, both in terms of support, outcomes, and knowledge, because it's not a matter of ability, it's a matter of opportunity. And so equity is understanding where those barriers and disparities are, and as leaders, making those brave and courageous decisions to redress and address those disparities. And then inclusion. People are included when we work on welcoming, valuing, engaging their perspectives, their contributions, collaborating with others when there's collective work and there's full participation of individuals and groups in the life, in this case, of the university, of the clinic, of the community, whatever it is, right? And this can influence a sense of belonging. So when we think about equity, diversity, and inclusion, leadership and integration, as innovative leaders, we're going to be working on increasing representation, making sure that people feel welcomed and engaged, and where there are disparities across their experiences or their networks or resources, that we work to increase those resources and close those gaps so people can fully contribute. So when we think about challenging the status quo, I've mentioned this before, and breaking barriers, right? Inviting perspective, asking more questions, being ready to facilitate the change. I want you to think about yourselves, right? So if innovative and inclusive leaders break barriers, develop new mindsets for new results, and challenge the status quo. And there are a number of ways this can look in your own setting. I'd like you to think and share with your group, you're going to break out in about a minute, as Fiona is setting up, what areas related to innovative and inclusive leadership would you like to develop further as an innovative leader? And if you have strengths in breaking barriers, being the first to do something, or you changed your mind about something, or maybe a community did, or you changed the way you did something, or you've challenged the status quo, or asked important questions. If you have those strengths and you want to share that, certainly you can do that. So you'll have about 10 minutes in your breakout to talk about, if you're already doing this, wonderful, share that so that others can learn from that. And if there's something you would like to share about what you would like to develop further so that you can be a more effective, innovative leader, you'll have 10 minutes. There'll be breakout rooms of 3 each. So there should be time, at least 2 to 3 minutes per person, or you could just have a round robin type setup. And so I will probably pop in and out, but now you're going to break out and have fun. See you soon.
Thank
Oh.
you.
Oh, I think we cut them off, Yama. They're like, oh, you could have stayed in those groups all day, huh? Welcome back, everyone. All right, so would love to hear, I think there were 7 or 8 groups. We may not get to all 7 or 8, but certainly would love to hear from 2 or 3, any representative, any person, anywhere. What did you hear, learn, share, experience? Who would like to share? Okay, thank you, Tara. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, so anyone wants to share from your group?
This is Dawn, and I was in group 1. One of our colleagues had problems with her technology, so she wasn't able to join in. But Ida Paul and I were able to have a conversation, and I am just so enamored of her. She works for EVS, and she has found her voice. She is using her voice, and she is implementing change, and I'm just so proud of her.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you, Ms. Powell. We celebrate you. Thank you.
I'm Kelly Robinson. I actually don't remember what group number we had,
Okay.
But Christina was in my group, and Coretta, I think I got their names correct. Anyway, we talked about, we had some challenges with remembering what the question was. So we talked a little bit about just what our role is and what brought us to this group, and what I think part of it was about development and how do we see ourselves developing as leaders. So we talked about what drew us to this particular session, what we do here at the University of Maryland, and all of us attended the perfection session before this, and found that there were some things that we needed to work on in terms of not seeing ourselves as perfectionists. And that was how we all thought about developing ourselves, next steps for developing as leaders.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. And that's related to something I'll bring up in another 5 minutes or so. Thank you for that. Karen Park.
Hi, Dr. McDowell. Hi, everybody. I was in group 3 with Mary Beth Gallego from Change Management and Advisory Services, as well as Christy Nichols from STAR, which is Shock, Trauma, and Anesthesiology Research. And I think we focus mostly on 2 things. The first is the huge cultural change that we're going through post-COVID, dealing with group dynamics, collaboration, the technological advances that we're working with, and sort of how that plays into what we're doing with our teams and creating a consistent culture, but which led to the second component, which is giving rise to voices. And I think my boss, Dr. Rhodes, said this with her conversation with Ida, but giving a forum for voices that do not always get heard, and making sure that we give a forum for those voices to be shared on campus.
Thank you. So very important. Thank you. And that's truly being inclusive. Thank you for that, Karen and group. Another group representative. Katrina, is your mic open? I'm not sure if you wanted to say something. Anyone else? You could drop something in the chat as well to share what your group talked about, or open your mic. Oh, Shakira and her group, supporting people who are challenging the status quo, is a good way to break barriers. You can put yourself in the position to bring change yourself. Sometimes it can be scary, but easing your way by supporting others is still a way of helping. So wonderful. Thank you, Shakira and group, for sharing that. Very important. Thank you so much. All right, so let's talk a bit about, as we're talking about improvement and development, leadership competencies. There's so many that different sources point to, but I will raise a few and things that I continue to work on myself that are important in various leadership roles. And I want to clarify also that leadership isn't necessarily about titles, although some people with titles have that role as a leader, but communication is really important. Being able to be clear, effective, both in terms of oral and written communication. You know, we're using technology so much now with texting and email and various documents and shared documents, and we're talking with each other, and listening is a really important part of communication as well. And being sure that we have mutual understanding and openness in our interactions with each other. Self-management and development is a great leadership competency. You know, how are you doing with your sleep? How are you doing with self-care? We could take a whole hour to talk about women and self-care, because we are often caring for others. Coaching, mentoring, and sponsorship, diversity and inclusion, some of the things that we've talked about here. There are other models that I found that are important, and in this one in particular, especially what we're doing at University of Maryland, Baltimore, and in all your various areas, I would start with people-centeredness. That anything that we're doing, we can have all the tech and all the money and everything else, but if we don't center our people, you know, from my perspective, our greatest resources, people's thoughts, ideas, minds, their contributions, their families, their lives, that they're important things that they bring from those life experiences and professional experiences, and just as people, that are really important for us as leaders to make sure that we are competent in that area. I'm going to go back because I thought I was sharing and I wasn't. Okay, so, all right. So I was sharing this before. I don't think you saw this. Communication, self-management, coaching, mentoring, and sponsorship. Thank you for that reminder. And in this model, people-centeredness. And I would also say that being strategic and integrative is important. You know, what are all our ideas in this room about something? How can we then chart a path to get there? And being integrative, what does the School of Medicine have to say about that? What about administration and finance? What about risk management, equity, diversity, and inclusion? Integrating those ideas to then commonly think about how we can move forward. Values driven, we have our core values at UMB. In my previous institution, we have what were known as principles of community. And this is the template, the basis, the foundation upon which we're going to build our work and how we're going to behave. Respect and integrity, equity and justice, and so on. In this model, culturally competent is important. In some of the social work and psychology research, we've talked about cultural humility, as in we always have more to learn about a given culture or group, and being open to that as an innovative leader. Emotional intelligence. I raised this, and it's interesting. Someone who talked about perfection before. And so emotional intelligence is one of the things that more and more in management literature, as well as in psychological literature, we are talking about and exploring. And this is the ways in which we both manage ourselves as well as complex social situations and contexts in order to produce positive outcomes. So in this are elements of self-perception, how aware we are of ourselves, who we are, how we express ourselves, how we relate to others, which is interpersonal, how we make decisions, problem solve, how we respond in terms of reactions, stress management. I should have started there, right? Stress management. Are we optimistic in times of stress? Are we flexible? How well do we tolerate stress? And so there are all these elements. You notice most of this model is focused on self, right? So how we manage ourselves, how we express, but also how individually manage stress. Some of these other pieces have to do with other people. Sometimes we make decisions with others and we relate to others, but all throughout this model are well-being, performance, emotional, and social functioning. I paused there for a moment to mention this because more and more there are competing dynamics in our lives, more and more in terms of health, our families that we talked about, family responsibility, childcare, elder care, and so on. And we're finding that heart disease is one of the #1 killers of women. We're seeing that mental health and well-being are becoming more primary concerns in the workplace. And so as innovative leaders, to be thinking more, not about self in a selfish way, but self as in a productive way that we can relate better to others. Okay, so I'm going to get ready to close and then we can have a discussion. So as you think about how you might make a positive impact, what you need as well as what you need to give. So both what you need to give and what you need to get. Who comes to mind is Dr. Mae Jemison, African-American woman astronaut who has studied STEM over the years. And when she was asked, how do you get to be where you are in your life? And she has a model, and she talks about this quite a bit. I heard her on NPR a few years ago, and she's written about this, and she's given talks about this. And she said, in order to succeed in anything in life, in order to be the first or one of the innovators, whatever that is, we need exposure, experience, and expectation. Exposure as in, I gave the example of my son and also of my daughter earlier, being exposed to whether good healthcare or a very tried and true education system that opens us up to study more about technology, or being exposed to higher education in some of my life and experience. And then having the experience that some of us do to work, to play, to interact in a particular setting, a health setting, a community setting, an educational setting, whatever it is that a business setting, whatever we value, to be able to either give that to someone or seek that in terms of what we are gaining. And then expectations. Someone expects something of you, we're more likely to perform at a higher level. I remember in my family, my mom as a teacher was more of the disciplinarian. I don't know if other people have that experience in their family. Not that my dad wasn't the disciplinarian, but he thought, well, she's the teacher. She is, she's the mom, and we were only sisters in my family. But I do remember that she disciplined us often. But I do remember my dad, he would just say, like, they would call me Di or D at home, and you would just hear him say, Di, like that, right? And I would just be like, because he would say something along, never spanked or anything like that, but he would say something like, you know what's expected of you, or something like that. And just that voice that you disappointed your parents and that they expected you to respect your elders or be kind or to be responsive and cooperative at home or something. That expectation helped me to go, okay, that's not what I want to do. I want to make a different choice. Now, I didn't always do that as a child, by the way. I was the young frisky. I was the last of 3, by the way. I don't know if there are any lastborns on the call, but they say we are more precocious and we are spoiled and all of that. I don't know what that has to do with anything, but anyway. Is anyone on the call a firstborn? You could just do a thumbs up or come off mic and say yes or something like that. I can't see anything in the chat right now.
2 thumbs up.
2 thumbs up.
3.
Okay, great. Kristen and others. Yeah. So, there are lots of things about birth order, but I raise that because the expectation in my family was, it doesn't matter what your birth order is, that, there were some values that we had as a family, and that's the way we should perform or behave. Okay, so exposure, experience, and expectations matter. And I invite you to think about ways that this comes up for you. I'll share 2 stories with you. I'll probably just do one. I don't know if we can get through 2. But when I was in elementary school, you've all heard of the spelling bee. There was a new principal who came to my school who was known as like the woman who could like turn every school into the champion or whatever. She was also very strict. And when she came, a lot of kids were like, they were so scared of her because she had a stern face and all of this. And I don't remember how she chose the various people, but she had like a spell off for all the 6th graders. So anyway, we studied for the thing, and then we had this competition. And when it was all said and done, she chose the best spellers. In my homeroom, I actually won for my home because I had studied. My mom was a teacher, all of this. And I was like, I'd really like to know what this competition is like. So I study and I get this thing. I get to be first in the class. And she calls my name, Diane Forbes, and then she says, Adolph Palmer. And I was like, Adolph Palmer? He didn't win, right? I think he won. He was second, and then he went to another competition or something. And I remember she came to me and she was like, I won. And this is a seminal moment in my life. It was not, I went to a girls' school later, but this was a co-ed school. And I remember she said, I want you to know that you won the competition. Like she told me this, and she's like, I want you to know you won the competition. But I chose this other student because she really wanted to have a co-ed team go for it. She wanted 2, and she wanted a co-ed team. She wanted a boy and a girl. So I guess among the boys, he won, but I won overall. How about who run the world? Girls. So, but she called me to tell me this, right, to her room, her study room, whatever. So I'm like, okay, thanks. But then came this whole thing about, no, we have to study for the regionals. And I was like, I didn't sign up for that, right? And you know what regionals involved? It involved every lunch break with my little sandwich that my mom used to make for me. I was 9 or 10 years old. And I would go to the music room where she was, and I had to study every lunchtime. I would eat in there with her and one other kid and study for this thing. I am 10. And one day I said to her, I'm done. I don't, preteen, everything. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm tired. I don't want to do this. Okay. So I said, all right, I'm going to quit. She said, well, do you want to stop? And I said, yeah. And she said, why? And I said, because my friends are out there playing and I'm in here studying. I don't want to do this, right? That I even had the gall to say this to an older person at 10. Oh my gosh. And I look back now, I'm like, oh my God, it was just so such a challenge. It was so innovative, right, group? So she said, you see those kids out there? They're playing and it's good. And she was playing is all good, but she said, I chose you because I thought that not only did you win the competition, but she thought that I had the persistence, the ability, the capacity to do this and to succeed. And I was looking at her like, who, me? Like me? Because I thought I could win my homeroom, but I didn't think I could win regionals now, right? I mean, I didn't think I could go to the district and get to the next level. And she told me this thing, and my parents had said some similar things to me, but you know what it is when somebody believes in you? And I was thinking, lady, I want to play. But you see, after she told me that story, whether it was some psychological whatever, mumbo jumbo, I was thinking, wow, she believes that I can do this. And she said, and if you want to really do this, this is part of what it takes, And I trusted that lady. Since COVID, I actually Googled her and I realized that she had died, but she'd lived a long life. And I said, okay. And she said, what do you think? And I said, oh, okay. And can I tell you, we did the school competition. Then we went to regionals. Do you know what happened at regionals? We spelled and we went back and forth. And I did not win regionals. But you know what happened? I came second. And do you know how that happened? There were like 40 kids. And my mom was a teacher, so she was teaching class. My dad had his own business, so he was running the business. And we spelled until parents went home, kids went home. I was hungry and I was spelling me and this other kid named Judith, who actually ended up going to my high school. and we spelled back and forth. And I remember her in her white outfit in the front with her arms over like her belly area on her leg. And every time I spelled something right, and it got really hard. I was tired and it got really hard. And I remember she would just give a nod like, you got that, you got it. You couldn't speak to the people because that would be cheating, but she would just nod, and that affirmation in the front. And I was like, I am not going to let her down. My parents were not there. So think about this picture now. They had work. Hey, this is a whole other family thing. They couldn't get time off to do this stuff, but she was in the front row, right in the middle aisle. And when it came down to what they call an unseen word, not in the spelling bee in the dictionary, it's like a word that you haven't seen before, different pronunciations, all of this, I think I just broke. I don't even remember what the word was now. And I remember regionals, right? And I came second. And I remember breaking down crying at the end of it. She was like, that's okay. She said, you gave it your best. You did a fine job, all of this. And she said, actually, that word, English can be so strange. She's like, that word is pronounced in different ways. And sometimes there's an alternate spelling depending on where you are in the world. I didn't know all of that, right? But she said, but you did your best and I am proud of you. And can I tell you, that was 40 plus years ago. My kids are tired of hearing me tell this story. But I learned persistence. I learned what it means when somebody gives you the experience to do something and believes in you that you can do it. And I learned that at 10, I could do hard things if someone believed in me, and most importantly, I believed in myself. And then from there, I went to a girls' school for 7 years, and there's a whole other thing. So, that exposure, that experience, that expectation changed me. Another thing too was going to high school and going to a career day. I won't go through that whole story, but I went to career day, and that was the first time in a career day I saw women in white with white hats, not military. And I stopped to find out, I asked the people, whose mom is that? Who are those people? And they said they're pilots. 1980 something, I'm in school, and I didn't want to be a pilot, but just looking at women in flight was a new thing to me, And so again, in my career day in school, almost 40 years ago, I saw women of color who were in uniform, who weren't military, and that would be great too, but who were pilots, as in doing something that I only thought men could do, right? So that changed me quite a bit. So experience matters. And being innovative leaders means sometimes being the first in things. Maybe sometimes you can give that belief or expectation to someone, being inclusive in that where someone can provide that for you. And that can be transformational. So I wanted to share those with you, a little bit of my experience, as well as some of the models out there. And I thank you for your attention today.